The forest hums with life, a quiet symphony of whispers and wings. Golden sunlight filters through an emerald canopy, dappling the ground in soft, shifting patterns. Leaves dance with the breeze, their gentle rustling like a secret shared between ancient trees. Birdsong rings clear, a melody of trills and calls, weaving harmony into the stillness. A stream trickles nearby, its crystal waters reflecting shards of light as if the forest itself is sighing. Yet, beneath this serene beauty, there's a stillness that lingers too long. A shadow stretches too far. A branch creaks though no wind stirs. It's as if the forest is alive, not just with creatures, but with something unseen. Watching. Waiting. Breathing in tandem with the rhythm of the earth. Would you like to expand this into a full script? Or add some eerie elements right after this introduction? Hiking trails stretch like lifelines, carved through the heart of the earth's oldest secrets. Each step carries a promise of freedom, discovery, and the gentle embrace of solitude. Forests symbolize peace, their emerald arches offering shelter from a noisy world. The crunch of boots on soil, the tang of pine in the air, the thrill of a winding path, it all feels like an invitation, whispered by nature herself. But there's another side to the forest, a shadow beneath its beauty. Venture too deep, and the world begins to change. The sunlight fades, filtered by branches that seem to grow closer. The cheerful birdsong grows quieter, replaced by a silence too heavy to ignore. And then comes the feeling, the prickling at the back of your neck. The sense that you are no longer alone, that something unseen is watching. For some, the forest is a sanctuary. For others, it becomes a labyrinth of unease, where every step feels like a dare. What is it about these ancient woods that stirs both awe and fear? Would you like the tone to lean more toward cozy or eerie from here? The forest breathes, steady and timeless. Sunlight spills like liquid gold through the canopy, tracing patterns on the mossy floor. Birds sing their songs, weaving threads of melody into the stillness. A gentle breeze whispers through the trees, carrying the earthy scent of leaves and bark. It feels untouched, eternal, a sanctuary for those seeking peace. But not every story ends in tranquility. There are whispers among hikers, tales of unseen eyes lurking in the shadows. Real voices recount the moments when beauty turned to unease, when the forest, so serene, seemed to shift into something aware. One felt footsteps echoing their own, though no one followed. Another spoke of shapes that flickered between the trees, always just out of reach. And then there were the whispers, soft but insistent, calling a name no one should know. They call it paranoia. Coincidence. The tricks of an overactive mind. But those who've been there, who've felt the weight of a gaze in the wilderness, they know better. In these stories, the forest is not just alive, it watches, it listens, and sometimes, it follows. Would you like to dive into one of these encounters next or expand on the premise? The forest was alive, humming with quiet wonder. The morning sun filtered through the towering pines, its golden beams painting streaks of light across the dewy ground. Birdsong rose and fell like a gentle lullaby, and a stream meandered nearby, its waters glistening like liquid crystal. The air was crisp, cool, and carried the earthy perfume of damp leaves and rich soil. She had been drawn here, to the sun-touched corner of the wilderness. For her, the forest promised more than beauty, it offered escape. Escape from the noise of the city, from the endless hum of screens and sirens. The trail stretched before her, winding deeper into a world untouched by time. Each step felt like a cleansing, a return to something pure and ancient. But as the trees thickened and the sunlight began to wane, the forest seemed to shift. The sounds of nature softened, as though the woods were holding their breath. The vibrant green around her deepened, the shadows growing long and unfamiliar. And then it came, that faint, inexplicable feeling. It started as a tickle in the back of her mind, like a forgotten thought struggling to surface. Her steps slowed. Her breath caught. Someone, or something, was watching her. She paused, scanning the dense foliage, but the forest gave nothing away. Only the rustling of leaves and the faint trickle of water broke the silence. Still, the feeling lingered, heavy and unshakable. The beauty of the forest remained, but now it carried an edge. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. Would you like to build on what happens next? Should we lean into suspense or keep the balance between serene and eerie? The forest wrapped her in its tranquil embrace. The rustle of leaves swayed in harmony with the breeze, like a lullaby sung by ancient trees. Sunlight flickered through the canopy, creating a dance of golden light and shadow on the ground. Her boots crunched softly on the dirt path, each step a gentle rhythm. She paused by a stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water, watching it ripple like liquid glass. Everything felt alive, yet still, as if the forest held its breath in reverence. But then, something shifted. It began as a rustling, soft, distant, almost imperceptible. She brushed it off as the wind teasing the undergrowth. Yet, as she walked, the sound seemed to follow, weaving itself into the rhythm of her steps. Footsteps? No, it was too faint. Too scattered. She turned her head, scanning the woods. Nothing. Further down the trail, the forest deepened, the sunlight fading into muted green. The rustling came again, this time closer, joined by a faint snap, a twig breaking underfoot. She froze, her breath catching. "Hello?" she called out, her voice swallowed by the towering trees. The silence that answered was thicker than before, weighted with something unseen. She quickened her pace, her heartbeat rising to match the thud of her boots. The sound followed, faint but steady, like an echo. Leaves rustled where the wind did not blow. Her eyes darted to the shadows, where branches seemed to twist into shapes they hadn't before. The feeling settled in, deep, instinctive, undeniable. She was being watched. The forest held its calm, a sanctuary untouched by time. She tried to focus on the beauty around her, the sun-kissed leaves, the earthy scent of moss, the distant call of a bird. But her footsteps, once a soothing rhythm on the trail, now felt too loud, too exposed. Behind her, the soft crunch of leaves began again. At first, it was subtle, barely more than a whisper beneath the trees. She slowed her pace, and so did it. Her breath caught, her ears straining for confirmation. When she stopped, the sound stopped too. The air around her grew heavier, the stillness pressing against her chest. A shadow flickered in the corner of her eye. She whipped her head around, nothing but swaying branches and dappled light. She forced a laugh, her voice shaky in the quiet. "It's just my mind," she muttered, as if saying it aloud could make it true. But the footsteps returned, louder now, crunching through leaves with deliberate intent. Her pulse quickened. She turned sharply, scanning the dense foliage. The forest stared back, silent, indifferent. No one was there. Her walk became a brisk stride, her eyes darting to every flicker of movement. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, shifting like figures melting into the background. Branches creaked, leaves rustled, and the footsteps. They were unmistakable now, echoing hers with a dreadful precision. She broke into a run, her breath ragged, her heart pounding in her ears. The forest that had welcomed her so warmly now loomed as a vast, endless maze. And behind her, the footsteps followed, closer, heavier, relentless. She didn't dare look back. The forest cradled her in its quiet beauty. Golden light filtered through the trees, painting the path with dappled warmth. Birdsong mingled with the soft rustle of leaves, a melody of nature's calm. Her steps fell into rhythm with the pulse of the woods, her breath steady, her mind clear. This was why she had come, to escape, to find solace in the wild. But the serenity didn't last. It started small, faint rustling in the undergrowth, the snap of a twig far off the trail. She dismissed it as a deer or a curious squirrel. Yet, as the hours passed and the shadows grew long, the forest seemed to change. The sounds grew closer, deliberate, as if something was pacing her. Her heart quickened when she heard the footsteps. Soft at first, then heavier, louder, matching her own pace. She spun around, eyes searching the endless expanse of trees. There was no one, only the vast silence, heavy and oppressive. She picked up her pace, her once relaxing hike now an urgent escape. The footsteps followed, steady and relentless. Shadows darted between the trees, flickering just out of focus. Branches swayed without wind, their skeletal fingers seeming to reach toward her. The forest welcomed him with open arms. The air was cool, carrying the crisp scent of pine and damp earth. Golden light filtered through the trees, casting soft, flickering shadows on the ground. Birdsong drifted lazily on the breeze, a melody of peace that seemed to stretch endlessly. He had found the perfect spot, a small clearing, surrounded by towering oaks and maples. The grass beneath his boots was soft and lush, dotted with tiny wildflowers that swayed gently in the evening air. Setting his pack down, he stretched, soaking in the tranquility. Here, far from the noise and chaos of the world, he felt free. The fire came to life quickly, its warm glow dancing against the encroaching twilight. The crackle of burning wood was soothing, a gentle rhythm to accompany the fading light. He brewed a cup of coffee over the flames, the rich aroma mingling with the forest air. As he sat back against a log, sipping slowly, the forest seemed to embrace him fully. The stars began to emerge, dotting the sky with a brilliance untouched by city lights. The clearing felt like a cocoon, safe and calm, the fire a beacon of comfort in the growing dark. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. But as the night deepened, the stillness began to change. The rustling in the trees grew louder, more deliberate, as if something unseen was circling the clearing. He paused, his cup halfway to his lips, his eyes darting toward the shadows beyond the firelight. The forest, once so inviting, now felt vast and unknowable, the darkness stretching endlessly. A twig snapped. Then another. His heart quickened as he scanned the edge of the clearing, but the trees gave away no secrets. The fire crackled louder, its glow shrinking against the weight of the night. And for the first time, he felt it, a presence, watching from the dark. The forest was alive with peace. A soft breeze whispered through the trees, swaying their branches in a gentle rhythm. Sunlight peeked through the canopy, painting golden streaks on the forest floor. The solo camper sat cross-legged by their small fire, the warmth of the flames mingling with the cool evening air. Birds chirped a fading melody as dusk began to settle. The fire crackled softly, sending occasional sparks into the dimming sky. Everything felt perfect, a sanctuary carved out of nature, untouched and serene. They leaned back against a fallen log, smiling as they watched the sky shift from amber to indigo. But as the forest grew quieter, something felt off. It started with a single twig snapping. They froze, their ears straining, but the sound didn't repeat. Probably just a deer, they muttered under their breath, their voice breaking the stillness. Still, their eyes darted toward the trees, scanning the shadowy outlines. Then came another sound, a faint rustle, low and deliberate, from behind the thick undergrowth. Their hearts skipped a beat. This wasn't the random noise of animals or wind. It was rhythmic, almost calculated, as if something, or someone, was circling the clearing. They rose slowly, the firelight flickering across their face. "Hello?" they called, their voice trembling just enough to betray their unease. The forest answered with silence, deep and suffocating. As they stood there, the feeling grew, like eyes pressing into their back, watching from every direction. The shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to thicken, stretching just beyond the reach of the firelight. The rustling continued, now moving in arcs, always just out of sight. They reached for their flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, but it revealed nothing but trees and empty spaces. Yet the signs were there, snapped twigs scattered unnaturally close, fresh indentations in the soft earth, as though something heavy had passed through. The wind carried a faint sound, a whisper, almost like breathing, but too deep and slow to be their own. The forest no longer felt serene. It felt alive. Watching. Waiting. The clearing was a world of warmth and light. The small fire crackled cheerfully, its golden glow dancing across the camper's face. Flames licked at the dry wood, sending tiny sparks spiraling into the cool night air. A kettle rested on a makeshift grill, steam rising from its spout in soft, curling tendrils. Wrapped in a fleece blanket, they leaned back, sipping tea from a metal mug. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them like a protective cocoon, keeping the chill at bay. Beyond the firelight, the forest loomed, a sea of dark, towering trees. The branches swayed faintly in the breeze, their edges black against the star-dusted sky. The camper smiled, savoring the contrast. The firelight felt alive, pulsing with its own heartbeat, a comforting glow in an otherwise impenetrable darkness. It was cozy, grounding, a reminder of home in the vast wilderness. But as the night deepened, the cold began to creep closer. The edges of the clearing blurred, the firelight seeming smaller, weaker against the encroaching shadows. The forest felt like it was pressing in, its silence growing heavier with each passing minute. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, unfamiliar sound. They glanced up, their mug pausing halfway to their lips. A low rustling came from the trees, just beyond the edge of the firelight. It wasn't the soft, random shuffle of animals, it was steady, deliberate. They pulled the blanket tighter, their eyes scanning the tree line. The darkness beyond the fire felt thick, almost alive, as if it was watching. The cozy clearing that had felt so safe now seemed fragile, a tiny bubble surrounded by something vast and unknowable. The fire crackled louder, a log collapsing into embers. For a moment, it flared brighter, illuminating the trees, and in the fleeting light, they thought they saw movement. A shadow, long and slender, slipping silently between the trunks. The warmth of the fire no longer felt comforting. It felt like a beacon, drawing whatever was out there closer. They added another log to the fire, their hands trembling, the flames surging upward in a desperate burst of light. But the darkness pressed on, cold and unyielding, just out of reach. And in the silence, they began to wonder, was it the firelight that kept them safe? Or had it only made them easier to find? Would you like the suspense to escalate further, or reveal what might be lurking? The morning came softly, like a whisper. The forest bathed in golden light, its trees casting long, dappled shadows across the ground. Birds returned with their songs, filling the crisp air with melodies that felt hopeful, almost cleansing. The campers stretched as they emerged from the tent, the cool dew clinging to their boots. The fire, now just a pile of gray ashes, smoked faintly in the soft breeze. Everything felt calm again, as if the unsettling sounds of the previous night had been a dream. They inhaled deeply, letting the freshness of the morning push away their lingering unease. But as they stepped toward the fire pit, something caught their eye. A patch of disturbed earth, just beyond the perimeter of the clearing. The dirt looked too smooth, too deliberate, almost as though it had been swept clean. Curiosity pulled them closer. There, etched into the ground, was a shape. At first, it seemed abstract, just random lines scratched into the dirt. But then they saw it, the unmistakable outline of a human figure. The arms were splayed outward, the legs slightly apart. It was crude but deliberate, every line intentional, pressed firmly into the earth. A chill raced up their spine as they stared, their breath catching in their throat. It hadn't been there the night before. They were certain of that. This spot had been undisturbed, part of the untouched forest floor. And yet, here it was, impossibly precise, as if someone, or something, had drawn it while they slept. Their eyes darted to the trees, the shadows now sharper under the rising sun. The forest, once serene, felt heavy again, its silence almost deafening. Had they truly been alone last night? The question lingered, cold and unshakable, as they hastily packed their gear. The forest watched as they left, its golden morning light unable to chase away the growing dread. And though they didn't look back, the image stayed with them, the outline, impossibly still, waiting in the dirt, like a warning. The trail was alive with the gentle hum of nature. Golden sunlight streamed through the canopy above, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was fresh, cool, and carried the faint scent of pine and earth. Laughter echoed as the group of friends moved along the familiar trail, their boots crunching softly against the packed dirt. "This place is perfect," one of them remarked, pausing to take a photo of a distant mountain framed by the trees. The others nodded, agreeing as they took in the beauty surrounding them. The trail was well marked, a line of trust that wound through the dense forest like a thread connecting them to safety. Hours passed, the sun now higher in the sky, its warmth touching their shoulders. They followed the painted markers on trees, stopping occasionally to admire a stream or take a break on a moss-covered rock. It was a day of adventure, a chance to disconnect and immerse themselves in nature's serenity. But then, something changed. The trail markers seemed to grow farther apart. They stopped seeing the familiar signs, the blazes painted on trees, the worn path beneath their feet. The trees began to look the same, endlessly repeating, as though they were walking in circles. "Did we miss a turn?" one of them asked, their voice tinged with uncertainty. "No," another replied, pointing to a marker on the tree just ahead. "We're still on the trail." Yet, the unease grew. The once clear path now seemed to fade, narrowing into patches of uneven ground. The sunlight, so warm and inviting earlier, began to feel dimmer, weaker, as though the forest were swallowing it whole. Shadows stretched longer, even though it wasn't late. An hour passed, then another. They walked, their conversations quieter now, their laughter replaced by murmurs of doubt. Phones came out, but there was no signal. Even the GPS seemed to glitch, the little blue dot spinning aimlessly. "We've been here before," one of them said suddenly, pointing to a broken branch lying across the path. "No way," another argued. "We've been walking straight this whole time." But it was unmistakable, the branch was the same. They had passed it an hour ago, its jagged edges pointing accusingly toward the sky. The forest had turned on them, folding in on itself, trapping them in a maze of trees. Panic started to creep in, an unspoken tension hanging heavy in the air. The forest no longer felt welcome. The trail markers seemed to grow farther apart. They stopped seeing the familiar signs, the blazes painted on trees, the worn path beneath their feet. The trees began to look the same, endlessly repeating, as though they were walking in circles. It felt alive, watching, its silence growing louder with every step they took. And as the sun began its slow descent, the friends realized something chilling. Despite walking for hours, the forest seemed endless, as if the marked trail had led them somewhere it wasn't supposed to. Would you like to expand on how they try to escape or introduce an eerie discovery that deepens the mystery? The forest was peaceful, cradling them in a cocoon of quiet. Tall pines whispered softly in the breeze, their needles shimmering in the dappled light. The sun, high in the sky, filtered through the branches, casting warm pools of light on the path ahead. Laughter echoed among the trees as the group of friends moved along the well-known trail, each step a beat in the rhythm of their adventure. The trail was wide and welcoming, stretching before them like a promise. Each marker, painted blazes on the trees, was a small anchor, reassuring them they were headed in the right direction. They spoke about life, about the future, about the beauty of the moment, their voices soft, carrying a lightness only found in the heart of nature. Hours passed in the warmth of the day. The air, fresh with the scent of pine and earth, filled their lungs with every step they took. The trail had led them deeper into the forest, but everything felt right, familiar and safe. Then, the first inkling of unease crept in. One of the friends paused, frowning. "I swear we've passed that rock before." Another looked up, scanning the trees, then shrugged. "It's a big forest. We're bound to see the same stuff." But as they moved forward, the same rock appeared again, just ahead, exactly where it had been before. The trail, once so sure and steady, now seemed to shift, bending in ways that didn't make sense. "No, really," one of them insisted, pointing to the rock. "We've been here before." Another glanced around, suddenly feeling the weight of the forest's silence. The markers, they looked familiar, too. Wasn't that the same tree they had passed? They turned around. The way back was the same as the way forward. The same twisted branch caught their eye, the same patch of moss seemed to glow faintly underfoot. We're looping back," one of them said, voice tight with disbelief. "But we've been walking for hours. We couldn't have." The realization settled over them like a shadow. They'd been walking, the same steps, the same trail. But no matter how far they went, they kept coming back to the same place. The sunlight, once warm and reassuring, now felt cold against their skin. The trees, towering and timeless, seemed to close in, their shadows stretching longer, deeper, until the forest no longer felt familiar. It felt like a maze, its edges twisting and shifting, the path itself becoming a puzzle they couldn't solve. The air grew heavier, their breaths shallow. The markers, their lifeline to the trail, were becoming more ambiguous. Were they seeing the same signs over and over, or had the forest shifted them somehow? They pressed on, each step now hesitant, the serenity of the morning gone, replaced by a creeping dread. How much further could they go before they realized they were lost? The forest was a haven of calm. A place where the only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The sun filtered through the canopy above, casting gentle beams of light that danced across the forest floor. The air smelled fresh, earthy, filled with the scent of pine and damp soil. The group of friends walked together, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps the only disruption to the forest's natural peace. Laughter floated between them, easy and carefree. They spoke of their lives, of the hike they had been planning for months, of how beautiful it felt to be surrounded by nothing but trees and sky. The trail was familiar, well-marked and inviting. The deeper they ventured into the woods, the more serene it became, as if the forest itself was wrapping them in a quiet embrace. But as the minutes passed, something in the air shifted, subtle, but undeniable. The birds fell silent, their melodies swallowed by the thickening silence. Then, it came, a whisper. At first, it was so faint they thought it was the wind, a trick of the breeze passing through the leaves. But then, it came again, clearer this time. One of the friends stopped, turning to the others with a puzzled look. "Did you hear that?" The others paused, listening. The air felt thick, charged. "I thought I heard something," another friend admitted, their voice tight with uncertainty. The whisper came again, this time so distinct it sent a chill down their spines. It was faint, but undeniably real, someone, or something, calling their names. Jess, Luke, Emily. The names drifted on the breeze, carried from somewhere deep within the forest. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling an unspoken tension build between them. "Okay, that's not funny," one of them said, trying to laugh it off, but the words came out thin and nervous. The air seemed to grow colder, the sunlight dimming as the whispers continued, each one drawing closer, more insistent. "Jess, Luke, Emily." But no one was there. The trees stood unmoving, their branches creaking softly in the wind, but nothing else stirred. The whispers felt like they were coming from all directions, wrapping around them, a chorus of voices that never seemed to stop. The friends began to look over their shoulders, eyes darting nervously into the forest depths, searching for the source of the eerie sounds. But the forest remained still, the shadows beneath the trees growing deeper, darker. The whispers weren't just voices, they felt like a presence, something unseen that was moving closer with every passing moment. It was as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. They quickened their pace, but no matter how fast they moved, the whispers followed, constantly just behind them. The serene beauty of the forest had turned into something far more unsettling, the tranquility now heavy with something else. "Who's doing this?" Jess whispered, her voice barely a breath. But no one had an answer. The whispering grew louder, each name called in soft, lilting tones that seemed to mock their confusion. And as they walked faster, the forest around them seemed to close in, its shadows stretching longer, wrapping tighter, until there was no escape from the eerie voices. Would you like to continue exploring their reactions or introduce a deeper mystery about who, or what, is calling them? The forest was tranquil, a world untouched by time. Tall trees stood like ancient sentinels, their leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. The sunlight, soft and golden, filtered through the canopy above, casting delicate patterns on the forest floor. The air was crisp, fresh with the earthy scent of moss and pine. The group of friends wandered along the trail, their laughter light and easy, echoing through the trees. It was a perfect day, clear skies, a gentle breeze, and a trail that seemed to lead them deeper into the embrace of nature. They spoke of their lives, of the small things, of how they cherished these moments of quiet. For now, there was only the forest and the calm, and they were content. But as time passed, the shadows grew longer, the sun beginning its slow descent. The path that had been so clear and welcoming now seemed to blur around them, as if the trees themselves were drawing closer. They pressed on, though a sense of unease began to settle in, subtle, like the rustling of leaves just out of sight. And then, the whispers. They had tried to ignore them before, soft voices, too faint to understand, too distant to be real. But now, they seemed closer. And the forest. It didn't feel quite right. "I'm getting a bad feeling," Jess muttered, her voice a whisper of its usual cheer. The others nodded, but they kept walking. The trail still stretched ahead, the markers still visible, as if they hadn't strayed. But something was off. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They walked in silence now, their footsteps quickening, their eyes darting between the trees. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, made them jump. The forest, which had once felt like a cozy, welcoming place, now felt heavy and oppressive. It was only when they reached a clearing, hours later, that the tension broke. They had unknowingly turned back, retracing their steps, finding a familiar landmark. A rock, a tree, a bend in the path. It was like they had never left. "I don't know how, but we're back," Luke said, his voice filled with relief. "Thank God," Emily added, looking over her shoulder one last time at the looming trees. They made their way out of the forest, the cool air of the evening settling around them. The chatter returned, tentative at first, then more lively as they neared the parking lot. The strange feeling, the whispers, the shadows, it all seemed like a distant memory now. But later, that night, when they were back at the cabin, a cold chill passed through their small circle. "I saw something," Jess said, her voice barely above a whisper. The others stopped mid-laugh, turning to her. "What?" "When we were leaving," she began, her gaze distant, "I saw something standing in the trees. It was watching us." The room fell silent. "I thought I saw it, too," Emily murmured. "Something moving in the shadows, just out of the corner of my eye." But none of them had seen it clearly, just a shape, something tall, shifting, just beyond the reach of the fading light. They tried to laugh it off, but the unease crept back in, slow and steady, a lingering presence they couldn't shake. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched, it hadn't ended when they left the forest. It had followed them, quietly, into the night. The forest was an oasis of peace. Tall trees whispered with the wind, their branches swaying gently in the rhythm of nature's song. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in soft beams, dappling the forest floor with golden patches. The air was crisp, cool, and smelled of pine, moss, and the earthy scent of the soil beneath. Birds sang from the high branches, their songs carried by the breeze, while small creatures darted through the underbrush, unseen yet ever present. It was easy to forget that such serene beauty hid ancient secrets. For centuries, forests like these have been the cradle of myths, of stories passed down from generation to generation. The kind of stories that make you pause, take a step back, and listen to the stillness around you. In the quiet of these woods, you might hear whispers of spirits, legends of cryptids, or the tales of lost wanderers whose footsteps never seem to leave. One such tale, well known in the deep woods, is that of the forest spirit, a creature said to guard the boundaries between the living and the unseen. With eyes that gleamed like moonlight and a presence that felt like the trees themselves, the forest spirit was a protector, yet a vengeful one. It was said to leave cryptic symbols carved into the bark of ancient trees, warning those who dared to venture too far. The spirit never showed itself directly, but its presence was undeniable. Many hikers, deep in the heart of the forest, reported a cold, unsettling feeling, as if someone, or something, was watching them. Further into the depths of folklore, there are whispers of the Wendigo, a creature of hunger and endless thirst, prowling the darkest corners of the forest. A being born of starvation, its appearance was said to be gaunt and twisted, its eyes hollow and searching. Those who wandered too deep into the woods, especially when the nights grew cold and long, sometimes felt its presence lurking just beyond the trees, stalking the unwary. Some said it was the embodiment of greed, others that it was a curse, a punishment for those who strayed too far from the paths of the living. But whether a myth or truth, the stories of the Wendigo kept travelers in check, a reminder that the forest was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Even more unsettling were the stories of the phantom wanderer, the ghost of a lost soul who had never found their way back. This wandering spirit was said to walk the trails at twilight, calling out to the living with a voice that sounded like a familiar name. But those who answered found themselves lost, their sense of direction fading as they followed the voice into the forest, only to vanish without a trace. No one knew who the phantom wanderer was, but they say that if you hear the call, you should never answer, because the forest might never let you go. As the friends walked deeper into the forest, they felt the weight of these stories settle upon them like a shadow. The trees, once peaceful and inviting, now seemed to watch them with unseen eyes. The whispers of the wind were no longer just the rustle of leaves, they felt like voices from another world, echoing faintly, just out of reach. The deeper they went, the more the light faded, the more the forest began to change. The trail became harder to follow, winding in ways that made no sense. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush, had them glancing over their shoulders, wondering if the spirits of the forest were drawing nearer. One of them, nervous but curious, spoke up. "Do you believe in those stories?" The others looked at him, the uncertainty in their eyes growing. "I've heard them," another friend replied. "My grandparents used to tell me about the Wendigo when I was a kid. They always said if you went too deep into the forest at night, you'd start hearing it, feeling it, even." They laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up their spines. But the deeper they went, the harder it became to ignore the whispers, the shadows, and the unmistakable feeling that they were not alone. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, stretching shadows across the path. And then, one of them swore they saw something, just a flicker, like a figure between the trees. A tall, thin shape, moving unnaturally, too fast for them to comprehend. Their laughter turned to silence. The forest that had once felt like an old friend now felt like a vast, uncharted realm, filled with stories of things that lingered between worlds. The forest stood still, a place where nature held sway. Tall trees rose like pillars, their bark etched with the marks of time. The soft whisper of the wind danced through the branches, singing songs of old. Sunlight filtered lazily through the canopy, casting gentle beams of gold across the forest floor. Birds called to each other, a chorus of life in perfect harmony with the land. It was a peaceful day, the kind that makes you want to linger, to breathe in the fresh air and let the world slow down. But as you walk deeper into the woods, you hear something, an undertone, a quiet murmur in the air. It's as though the forest itself is holding a secret, one whispered between the leaves, hidden in the shadows. As the day stretched on, you stop and take a break by the edge of the forest. Here, the trees seem to part slightly, allowing a glimpse of the village in the distance. And in that moment, you begin to speak with the locals, the ones who know the forest as well as their own backyards. They offer you warnings, subtle, but heavy with meaning. "Stay away from the northern woods," an old woman says, her voice low and steady. "That's where the shadows gather. The ones who went in, they didn't come back." Her eyes are steady, unblinking, as if the weight of her words carries the weight of truth. She doesn't look frightened, but there's something deep in her gaze, something unspoken. Another local, a man who spends his days fishing by the river, nods in agreement. "Strange things happen up there," he says, pointing to the thick part of the forest in the distance. "Things you can't explain. I had a cousin who went looking for mushrooms up that way. He came back, but not the same. He didn't speak for days, just sat by the fire, staring at the woods. The man's voice trails off as if the memory itself is too much to bear. You ask about the other areas, the places where the forest feels less ominous, more inviting. But the replies are tinged with hesitation, and those who speak of the forest are quick to change the subject, eyes shifting, hands moving nervously. And yet, despite the unease, there's a sense of respect for the woods, as if the trees themselves demand it. One elder, sitting by a wood stove inside his small cabin, leans forward. "I don't know why, but there's a place deep in the forest where the land just feels wrong," he says, his voice a rasp. "It's not far from here, but you won't find it unless you're meant to. They say it's a place where time forgets itself." He pauses, eyes flickering toward the window, as if expecting someone, or something, to be watching from the trees. "I never go near it. Nor should anyone else. Trust me on that." Despite their warnings, the lure of the forest is strong. A part of you wonders if you're just hearing the local superstitions, stories passed down over generations, woven into the fabric of the town's identity. But another part, one you can't quite shake, feels a pull, an urge to venture deeper, to uncover the truth hidden in the silence of the trees. The sun begins to sink lower in the sky, casting a reddish glow across the forest as you stand on the outskirts, contemplating the paths before you. The woods, both inviting and forbidding, stretch out in front of you like an endless mystery, one that whispers, one that tempts. "Maybe one day, you'll see it for yourself," the fisherman says with a half a smile, as if he already knows what you're thinking. The northern woods are waiting. The day began quietly, bathed in a soft, golden light. The forest stood still, a sanctuary of peace, where nature's rhythm flowed like a gentle melody. Birdsong filled the air, the sound weaving through the branches, while the breeze whispered secrets in the leaves. Beneath the towering trees, the forest floor was a soft carpet of moss and fallen leaves, each step cushioned by the earth's embrace. In the heart of the forest, an ancient village lay nestled, humble cottages with thatched roofs, their smoke rising in lazy tendrils from the chimneys. It was a place where time seemed to slow, where old traditions held sway. On this morning, like many before, the villagers gathered at the village square for a small ceremony, one that was as old as the trees themselves. The elder of the village, a woman with silver hair and weathered hands, stood before the gathering. With quiet reverence, she spoke words passed down through generations, her voice calm and steady, like the heartbeat of the land. It was the blessing of the forest, a ceremony to honor the spirits who protected the woods and its creatures. "May the trees stand tall, may the rivers flow clear, and may the spirits of the earth watch over us," she intoned, her voice echoing through the clearing. The villagers, dressed in simple yet beautiful garments, took part in the ritual. They offered small tokens, wooden carvings, hand-woven wreaths of flowers, and sweet-smelling herbs, placing them at the base of the largest tree in the village. The ceremony was a peaceful tradition, one that celebrated the deep connection between the land and the people. But there was a certain heaviness in the air, as though the forest itself was listening. Once the ceremony ended, the villagers went about their day, but there were those who spoke in hushed tones, their faces shadowed by unspoken thoughts. The elder, with her knowing gaze, had once again warned them. "Be mindful of the woods after dusk, for the spirits are restless in the dark." It was a quiet reminder, one that many heeded. For though the village had lived in harmony with the forest for centuries, there were stories, old stories, that lingered in the corners of their minds. Tales of the Shadow Walker, a figure who moved silently between the trees at night, its footsteps as soft as whispers. It was said to be neither human nor beast, a creature that could blend into the darkness, its presence only known by the flicker of movement in the corner of one's eye. And then there was the tale of the Watcher, an ancient spirit who roamed the forest, guarding its deepest secrets. It was said that the Watcher never slept, never left, always present at the edges of the trees, watching with eyes that gleamed like moonlight. Those who had ventured too far into the forest at night spoke of hearing its breath, heavy and slow, behind them. Some claimed to have seen it, a shape half seen through the mist, its form both part of the forest and separate from it, like a shadow that moved with purpose. The villagers never spoke of the Watcher openly, but the fear lingered in their eyes whenever they gazed into the darkening forest. Even on the clearest day, when the sun shone brightly and the birds sang their songs, the woods had an eerie undertone, one that whispered of things unseen, of ancient forces that still watched over the land. As nightfall approached, A few of the villagers gathered around a fire, its warm glow flickering against the growing chill of the evening air. They spoke of the day's ceremony, of the blessings offered to the trees and spirits, but there was an unspoken tension in their voices. The shadows around the fire stretched long, and the rustling of leaves sounded like soft footsteps just out of sight. One of the young men, his eyes bright with the curiosity of youth, spoke of venturing into the woods that evening, just as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky. "Maybe I'll walk to the northern edge," he said with a grin, trying to sound brave. "See what lies beyond the old path." But the elder, who had been sitting quietly by the fire, raised her hand. "No one walks those paths after dark," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper above the crackling of the fire. "You know the stories. They are not just stories. The forest remembers, and the watcher sees all." The young man, his bravado faltering, nodded and fell silent. The fire flickered in the night, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the trees. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind, the soft crackling of the flames, and the rustling of leaves, a sound that, just for a moment, seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. The morning light poured gently over the forest, a soft haze clinging to the treetops like a dream. A lone photographer, eager for the perfect shot, stood still on the forest's edge. The camera in their hands felt like an extension of their own soul, clicking with a rhythm as natural as the forest itself. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, a peaceful quiet, punctuated only by the call of distant birds. The photographer moved deeper into the woods, the camera capturing the quiet beauty of sunlight dancing through the leaves, of wildflowers swaying softly in the breeze, of moss-covered trees standing like ancient guardians. Each photo was a piece of the forest's soul, a moment frozen in time, untouched and pure. But as they paused to review one of their shots, something strange caught their eye, a faint glimmer in the distance, an almost imperceptible flicker between the shadows of the trees. Just beyond the frame of what was captured. They dismissed it at first, thinking it was just the play of light. But as the day wore on, it happened again. In another photo, in the corner of the frame, a pair of eyes, glowing, like the reflection of moonlight on water. The photographer's pulse quickened. They zoomed in, the screen revealing more, two eyes, soft yet intense, peering from between the trees. Nothing seemed out of place in the forest, but there was something undeniably wrong. The photographer shook their head. It must be the lens, the shadows, a trick of light. But the unease began to grow with every shot, every photo that seemed to capture the eyes, hiding in the corners, watching, unblinking. The air around them grew heavier, colder. The forest that had once felt like a place of calm and peace now seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the trees themselves were alive with whispers, their branches swaying with a secret that they wouldn't share. They moved quickly, setting up a new shot, but when they glanced at the screen, there it was again, those eyes, lurking in the shadows. With each click of the shutter, the eyes became clearer, more distinct, more intense. They were no longer a trick of light, but a presence, unmistakable, watching, waiting. The photographer's heart raced as they turned around, expecting to see someone, something, but the forest remained still, empty. Only the trees, only the rustling of leaves, nothing but the soft hum of nature. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, a cold weight pressing on their chest. They couldn't shake the sensation that something was following them, something that had always been there, and had now been awakened by their gaze. With shaking hands, they packed up their gear, the camera still hanging at their side. But as they prepared to leave, they turned one last time to the forest, to the trees, to the eyes, and there, just at the edge of the clearing, they saw it, a figure. It was fleeting, only a shadow, but for a heartbeat, it was real. The photographer's breath caught in their throat, and they ran, the camera forgotten, leaving the forest behind, but never truly free of its gaze. Later, back home, they reviewed the photos one last time, hoping for some explanation, but the eyes were still there, in every image, watching, unblinking. And in the silence of the night, the photographer couldn't shake the thought, had they captured something they weren't meant to see? The forest had been their sanctuary, a place where the world slowed, and the light kissed the earth. But as the photographer turned to leave, a strange shift stirred in the air, a subtle tension, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The familiar path they'd walked hours before now felt different, uncertain, like the forest itself had shifted in the night. The trail seemed narrower, the trees taller, their branches reaching closer, as if the woods were leaning in, listening, waiting, watching. With each step, the air grew thicker, the sunlight dimmer, the birds' songs fading, replaced by a stillness so complete, it felt as though the forest had held its breath. They moved forward, a sense of urgency quickening their pulse, but the branches seemed to twist and curl, bending over the path in unnatural angles, as though the forest itself was drawing closer, a living, breathing entity intent on keeping them within its grasp. The photographer's footsteps faltered, the familiar trail now an elusive memory. Every turn they took led to another dead end. The once open path was now a maze of tangled branches, each step forward only bringing them deeper into the woods, the light fading further with every stride. They stopped and looked around, heart pounding, breath shallow. The trees that had once been so inviting, so tranquil, now stood like silent sentinels, their trunks closing in on them. The forest felt alive, and not in a comforting way. There was a malevolent presence now, as if the woods had stirred from a long slumber, and they were no longer a guest, but a trespasser. A shiver crawled up their spine, the once peaceful rustle of leaves now a cacophony of whispers, faint, distant voices that seemed to echo from every direction. The photographer turned, heart racing, the camera still in their hands, but the lens now felt like a fragile shield, unfit to protect them from whatever lingered just beyond sight. The path behind them was gone, erased by the forest, like it had never existed. And ahead, the trees seemed to press in tighter, their branches curling like fingers, as if trying to close the door, trapping them in a place between the earth and sky. The air turned cold, the breeze now sharp, the scent of pine and earth replaced by something heavier, a scent like damp soil, decay. The photographer's feet moved instinctively, but the path ahead seemed to shift with each step, a labyrinth with no exit. And then, just as they turned another corner, there, in the trees, they saw it, the same eyes, glowing faintly in the shadows, a presence that had always been there, but now it was unmistakable, unavoidable. The photographer froze, caught in the gaze of whatever watched from the woods, the air growing colder still, the branches overhead swaying as though alive, and then, the whisper came. Not from the wind, not from the trees, but from the earth itself, a soft, echoing voice that seemed to hum through the air. "Hello," rhythmic whisper, "stay." The photographer's heart raced, a surge of panic flooding their veins. They turned, stumbling backward, but the trees only pressed closer, the branches thickening, the path narrowing until it disappeared entirely, swallowed by the forest. With nowhere left to go, the camera fell from their hands, the click of the shutter lost in the suffocating silence. The forest had closed in, and the photographer was trapped, not by their own feet, but by the very woods that had once been so inviting, now transformed into something else, something darker. And in the distance, the eyes, they were still watching. Panic surged as the photographer broke free, the dense trees finally parting before them, the air clearing, the weight lifting with each step. The path ahead, barely a path at all, but the forest's grip loosened, and they fled, stumbling through the underbrush, every step a desperate cry for freedom. The sun's warmth had returned, a false comfort after the cold, suffocating dread. The clearing opened up ahead, a sign of civilization, a distant road, a far-off highway, the promise of escape. Breathless, heart-hammering, the photographer emerged, the forest now behind them, and the world outside felt so normal. The sunlight was gentle, the air sweet, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness they had just fled. They leaned against their car, the weight of the camera in their hand, a silent companion after the terror. Their fingers fumbled, but they couldn't help themselves, they had to check the photos. The first few were normal, beautiful landscapes, serene images, a tranquil moment captured, still soaked in the memory of light. But the last photo froze them in place. It wasn't the forest they had just escaped. No, it was a shot from farther down the path, where the trees had closed in so tight. And there, in the distance, a figure stood, still and silent. A figure out of place in the natural world, darker than the shadows, looming between the trunks like a specter. Its form was distorted, as if the forest itself was warping, a shape that shouldn't be, yet was undeniably real. The eyes, those same eyes, now glowed in the figure's silhouette, but they weren't alone. Dozens more eyes blinked from the shadows, small, scattered, like watching creatures, watching from every angle. A chill ran through their spine, the figure's presence so overwhelming, so wrong, that the forest, once so full of life, now felt like an ancient prison. The photographer's hands shook, fingers tracing the screen, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. But the image was clear. There was no mistaking it. They had been followed. Not by a person, not by anything human at all. The figure was still there, frozen in time by the camera's eye, a witness to something far more sinister than the peaceful woods they'd once known. The photographer wiped their brow, their skin cold despite the warmth of the sun. Their hearts still pounded as they stared at the screen, and somewhere deep inside, they knew, that figure was still out there, still watching. The forest hadn't let them go. It had only waited. And in the corner of the last photo, something else lingered, a faint shape, barely noticeable, almost too quick to see, a shadow moving behind the figure, closer now than ever. The photographer stepped back, dropping the camera as the forest's whispers echoed in their mind. They had escaped, but the forest was never far. Not really. It had seen them. It had always been watching. Opening. The forest was calm. A soft wind whispered through the branches, sunlight scattered like golden confetti, the scent of pine lingered in the air, fresh and inviting. Birdsong filled the stillness, a peaceful symphony of nature's harmony. Yet, hidden in this serene beauty, there were stories that clung to the trees. Whispers of hikers who felt watched, of campers who heard footsteps in the silence, and of travelers who came out of the woods changed, a little more wary, a little more cautious. The accounts. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a seasoned hiker, eyes tired but alert, said, until the rustling started. Not from the wind, not from the animals. I'd stop. And then it would stop. But I could feel it. Something was following me. The camera shifts, a slow pan of the dense forest, tall trees, their trunks wide and ancient, a place where light couldn't quite touch the earth. The hiker's voice continues, it wasn't until I saw the footprints, big ones, deeper than my own, leading off the trail where no one had been, balance with experts. Cut to a psychologist, her expression thoughtful but calm. I've spoken to many who felt this way, that primal sense of being watched. It's called hypervigilance. When we enter unfamiliar or dense environments, our brains tune into every tiny shift, every crack, every rustle. But when that sense of danger triggers, it can make the mind create stories to explain the fear. Her words echo softly, blending with the gentle creak of trees, but there's something unsettling about it, a knowledge that lingers, a knowing that the forest doesn't just play tricks on the mind. The paranormal perspective. Next, a paranormal investigator, looming in the shadow of an ancient oak, clad in dark clothes, their voice calm but laced with an unsettling certainty. We've heard accounts from hikers who say they've seen figures, shadows that move against the flow of light, a presence that doesn't fit with the rest of the environment. And there are places within forests that are, well, some would say they're off limits. We've found areas with disturbances, electromagnetic shifts, strange noises, cold spots that shouldn't exist. Could be nothing. Or could be something that doesn't want to be found. The camera shifts between eerie, fog-clad woods and the investigator's focused gaze, a flicker of unease in their eyes as they speak, as though the forest knows, and it is watching. Closing the balance. As the story continues, the voices from hikers and experts blur, the serene beauty of the forest contrasts with the warnings, the strange occurrences. Psychologists argue the mind plays tricks, but paranormal experts speak of things unseen, and the hikers. They know what they've felt. The forest remains quiet, unchanged, unmoved, as the stories continue, fleeting whispers in the trees, echoes of something lurking just beyond sight. Opening. The forest stood still, a sanctuary of green, where the air was cool and thick with earth's breath. The soft rustle of leaves whispered overhead, birdsong carried through the branches, a lullaby of nature. The sunlight filtered lazily through the trees, a gentle dance of light and shadow on the ground. All was peaceful, a perfect place to breathe, to escape the noise of the world. Yet, in this tranquil expanse, a different kind of silence hung heavy. A stillness not of peace, but of anticipation, as if the woods themselves were waiting. The heart of isolation. Out here, in the vast, unbroken quiet, a person can feel small, a whisper of movement among the towering trees, a sound that can't be traced, a branch snapping, a sudden flutter of wings, all the echoes of an empty world. And with that silence, comes a growing awareness, alone. But are you really? The stillness seems to hum, like the forest is alive, not with creatures, but with something else, something unseen. The fear in the sounds. Sometimes, it's the smallest noises that get to you. A seasoned hiker's voice fills the air, his words slow, measured, as though each syllable treads carefully. At first, it's nothing. Just the wind, rustling leaves, shifting underfoot. But then it's different. Footsteps. Barely there, but you hear them, and it's not just the forest talking anymore, it feels like something is listening. The camera shifts to the dense trees, the wind stirring the branches, a soft, rhythmic creak. The faintest hint of movement in the shadows. The subtle hints of being watched. The expert's voice enters, calm but curious. Humans have an innate sensitivity to being watched. It's part of our survival instinct, a primal awareness that keeps us alert. In places like forests, where isolation is total, even the most natural sounds, the calls of birds, the rustling of animals, can begin to feel like something more. The wind whispers louder now, the sound of the leaves like murmurs from beyond the trees. The expert continues, and when you can't see what's making the noise, your mind starts filling in the gaps. That snapping twig? Could be a deer, sure. But what if it's something else? The growing uncertainty. The camera zooms in on the forest, a patch of sunlight trying to break through, but it fades too quickly, leaving more shadows. The leaves rustle again, too deliberately, too close. In this solitude, the simple act of walking, of breathing, begins to feel like a performance, as though you're no longer alone, but watched from the shadows. A subtle shift in the air, an unseen presence, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, a coldness, not from the environment, but from something else. Closing the balance. And so, the forest remains, both peaceful and unsettling, a world of calm that holds its breath, a place where nature's sounds blend with fear, where isolation makes the smallest sounds echo louder. The woods are alive, but it's not just the birds or the rustling leaves, it's the way the silence deepens, the way your heart beats faster when you feel like something is watching you. Opening. The forest was calm, bathed in the soft light of dawn, shadows stretched long across the forest floor, the air cool and rich with the scent of earth and pine. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs lifting the silence, a melody that seemed to echo for miles. The trees stood tall, ancient guardians of the land, their leaves shimmering in the early light, a place of peace, a place to wander, to find solace in nature's embrace. But even in this tranquility, there was a strange awareness, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, you were not entirely alone. The scientific perspective. Humans are wired to detect movement, to sense when something is out of place. A voice, calm and measured, cuts through the stillness. It's the voice of a scientist, one who studies the effects of the natural world on the human mind. Isolation, combined with the sounds of the forest, can trick the mind into thinking it's being watched. The camera pans across the forest, the wind rustling through the leaves, a soft creaking of branches. These noises, the snap of a twig or the flutter of wings, are natural occurrences, the scientist continues. They might trigger a heightened state of awareness, what we call hypervigilance. The brain becomes more attuned to sounds, to movement, even if it's nothing more than the environment shifting. The unexplained. But the scientist's voice softens, acknowledging the uncertainty that lingers. Of course, there are things we don't fully understand, the way the mind can sometimes perceive something that isn't there, or how certain places, deep in the forest, can leave a lasting impression. Sometimes, people say they feel watched, even when they're alone, and there's no logical reason for it. The camera captures the dense shadows beneath the trees, a flicker of movement just beyond the edge of the lens, but nothing is there. The camera pans across the forest, the wind rustling through the leaves, a soft creaking of branches. These noises, the snap of a twig or the flutter of wings, are natural occurrences. And that's the fascinating part, the scientist concludes. While we can explain a lot of what happens in nature, there are still stories, still experiences, that remind us how much there is left to discover. The balance. The forest remains, alive with the sounds of life, the whispers of wind through branches, the soft calls of birds in the distance. There is no sense of danger, but there's something more, something intangible, something that can't quite be explained. The mind wanders, the stories unfurl, of hikers who felt watched, of campers who heard footsteps in the dark. But for every unsettling tale, there is a scientist's explanation, a rational voice that grounds us, and yet, the feeling lingers, a sense that maybe, just maybe, the forest holds secrets we haven't yet uncovered. Opening. The forest stood bathed in the soft, golden light of the afternoon, a quiet world where time seemed to slow, as the wind whispered through the canopy, carrying the scent of moss and earth. A small brook bubbled nearby, its waters clear, dancing over smooth stones, the sunlight glinting off its surface like scattered diamonds. Leaves, golden and green, fluttered gently to the ground, a soft carpet forming beneath the towering trees. Everywhere, the forest hummed with life, a tranquil symphony of birdsong and rustling branches. The warm glow of the sun filtered through the gaps in the trees, filling the space with a soft radiance, creating pools of light that seemed to hold the forest's secrets, inviting you to pause, to sit, to breathe, and to let the peace of nature wrap around you. But beneath the serenity, there was something more, a presence, subtle yet undeniable. The shadows between the trees were deeper than they seemed, the quiet whispers of the wind, perhaps a little too clear, as if the forest itself were speaking, or listening. Opening. The forest stood bathed in the soft, golden light of the afternoon, a quiet world where time seemed to slow, as the wind whispered through the canopy, carrying the scent of moss and earth. A small brook bubbled nearby, its waters clear, dancing over smooth stones, the sunlight glinting off its surface like scattered diamonds. Leaves, golden and green, fluttered gently to the ground, a soft carpet forming beneath the towering trees. The duality of the forest. It was easy to fall in love with the forest's beauty, to sink into the quiet comfort of the moment, the firelight flickering softly against the darkening sky, the cozy crackle of branches in the fire. Yet, the deeper you went, the more the forest seemed to shift. The shadows grew longer, the sounds grew richer, filling the air with a sense of mystery, a mystery that belonged to the forest alone. It was in the way the trees seemed to lean closer together, their branches intertwining like old secrets, and in the way the wind suddenly stilled, as if waiting for something, or someone, to break the silence. The forest was both a haven and an enigma, a place of comfort and a place of wonder. It held the stories of those who wandered too deep, the echoes of footsteps never fully explained. Yet, despite the mystery, it always welcomed you back, with open arms and a quiet invitation, to return and discover more. Opening. The trail stretched before you, winding gently through the forest, a path carpeted in soft pine needles, with the distant sound of a stream playing a quiet melody. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a warm, golden glow, as birds flitted through the trees, their calls mingling with the rustling of the leaves. The air was crisp and fresh, filling your lungs with each deep breath. Hiking, in all its simplicity, offered something magical. A chance to reconnect with nature, to witness its beauty firsthand, and to walk beneath the ancient, towering trees, each step taken in peace, with the forest as your companion. But even in these serene moments, it's important to remember a few simple tips to ensure your adventure remains as safe as it is enjoyable. Tips for safe hiking while enjoying nature. 1. Plan ahead and know your trail. Before heading out, take a moment to research your trail. Know the length, difficulty, and what to expect along the way. Whether it's a well-trodden path or a remote wilderness trail, having a map or GPS on hand can guide you safely through the journey. 2. Pack the essentials. Bring enough water and snacks to stay hydrated and energized, a first aid kit for emergencies, a flashlight for when daylight starts to fade, and layers to stay comfortable as the weather can change in an instant. 3. Wear proper footwear. The forest may seem inviting, but some trails can be uneven or slippery. A sturdy pair of hiking boots will keep your feet protected and provide better traction on uneven ground. 4. Tell someone your plans. Share your hiking plan with a friend or family member. Let them know where you're going and when you plan to return, just in case your adventure takes longer than expected. 5. Respect wildlife. Forests are home to all kinds of wildlife, from the chirping of birds to the rustle of leaves that might signal a curious animal nearby. Keep a respectful distance from any wildlife you encounter, and avoid feeding them, as human food can be harmful to their health. 6. Stay on the trail, while the forest beckons to be explored. Sticking to marked trails ensures that you stay on safe, manageable paths, avoiding the risk of getting lost in unfamiliar terrain. 7. Practice leave no trace. The beauty of the forest is in its untouched splendor. Be mindful of the environment and pack out everything you bring in, leaving only footprints and taking nothing but memories. 8. Trust your instincts. If at any point you feel uneasy, trust your intuition. The forest can be peaceful, but sometimes it's best to turn back if something feels off, whether it's sudden weather changes or a lingering sense of discomfort. Conclusion. With these simple precautions, you can fully immerse yourself in the serene beauty of nature, whether you're hiking through a sun-dappled forest or trekking along a misty trail. Nature's wonders are best enjoyed with mindfulness and respect, ensuring that your journey remains both safe and enriching, a perfect harmony of adventure and peace, where the forest always welcomes you back, as a friend and a guide. Ending. As the sun sets and the shadows grow long, the forest takes on a quiet magic, its branches stretching toward the sky, bathed in soft, fading light. The air is cool now, the rustling of leaves sounds almost like a whispered secret, and the stillness feels comforting, like a gentle embrace. Forests have a way of capturing the imagination, drawing us in with their timeless beauty, their ancient trees standing like silent witnesses to the passing of generations. There's a peacefulness here, a sense of belonging, as though the world slows down, and everything falls into place. But there's also a certain mystery, a depth that feels unknowable, the secrets hidden in the shadows, the soft, fleeting sounds that seem to come from nowhere, the way the light dances on the leaves, making everything feel just a little more elusive. Perhaps it's this balance between peace and fear, this quiet blend of beauty and enigma, that makes the forest so captivating. We seek solace in its calm, yet are drawn to its mystery, wondering what lies just beyond our sight, what stories the trees could tell, and why, sometimes, we feel as though the forest is watching us in return. In the end, it's the forest's dual nature, the harmony of comfort and the thrill of the unknown, that calls to us. It's a place where we feel small yet infinite, where we can breathe deeply and wonder, finding peace in its embrace, while quietly wondering what secrets it holds, just beyond the next bend in the trail. Opening. The forest stands still, bathed in the soft glow of the morning sun. Its towering trees stretch high into the sky, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze, a peaceful whispering that carries the secrets of time. Birdsong echoes through the branches, a sweet melody that dances on the wind. The air is crisp, filled with the scent of earth and pine, a reminder of the ancient rhythm of the world. With each step, the forest seems to welcome you, its trails winding deeper into a world untouched, a place where the mind can quiet, and the soul can breathe. But beneath this tranquil beauty, a subtle unease lingers, like the faint rustling of leaves in the distance. The woods, vast and endless, have a way of making you feel small, a part of something much larger than yourself. Yet, sometimes, the forest feels as though it's watching, a quiet presence that moves with the shadows, flickers of movement just beyond our sight. Ending with the open-ended question. Are forests truly watching us, or is it our own minds, filling the silence with their thoughts, projecting their secrets onto the trees? Is the forest merely a mirror, reflecting our innermost fears and wonders, or is there something more, something hidden, just out of reach?